Well, thank you very much for coming to ChamberU. We are Doug and Polly White, and we actually started a fairly interesting journey about 3 years ago.
Right. Well, we started our company, our little consulting company, and we named it Richmond Performance Group. And we chose that name after, this long scientific process, which pretty much involved beer and cheesesteaks and, conversations. There was really nothing behind it, but we thought it sounded pretty good.
And so we went out and we created a brand, right? We designed a logo, which was very creative, Richmond Performance Group, RPG. We used the Georgia font. We picked the blue that I like. Polly contributed a box around it.
The 3 letters. Somebody later told us it looked exactly like the AIG logo.
Which I felt really good about. They were saying that to put it down, and I thought, but they probably paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for that logo.
Right.
We came up with it completely independently on our own, and it looks the same. We're brilliant.
We are brilliant, yes. But, Richmond Performance Group, we thought this was a pretty good name. And from day one, when we went out and talked to people, we'd say, we're Doug and Polly White with Richmond Performance Group.
In fact, the very first day,
yes,
we went and met somebody at a networking event and said, we're Doug and Polly White from Richmond Performance Group. And they said, oh, I've heard of that.
Yes.
And we knew they hadn't. Because we just made it up the day before.
Right. But it sounded like other things like Performance Food Group and so on. So I think people thought about that. But we were told about a year after we got started that we had actually chosen the absolute worst name in the entire world for a business. A marketing company told us that.
And in retrospect, there were probably a couple of reasons that they decided it was a bad name. One reason we think was because they like to help companies rebrand.
So that could have been one of the reasons.
That might have been one of the reasons,
yeah.
but there were other reasons.
No, frankly, what they said, and this made sense to us, is that Richmond, Performance, and Group are 3 words that are pretty expensive when you're trying to do SEO. And so if you're trying anything with a city name in it, and then Performance and Group, and we had all 3 of them in our name. We had managed to pick the 3 worst names. So we did. We went through the rebranding process. Now here's where it gets interactive. So, and I have to cover this up at this point and say, so does anybody know the name of our current business? Anybody? Oh, we got a couple of them in here? I know, Jacob, you know, but
well, we were talking to you before, it's Whitestone.
Whitestone Partners, okay, yeah, you get the prize. But most people don't know, and what we figured out is that's not our brand.
It turns out that we're beginning to understand that our brand is actually Doug and Polly.
Yes.
Because everybody who knows us as Doug and Polly.
Yes, so that is our brand. And brand is something that is more than a name, it's more than a logo. We're starting to understand that brand really reaches far beyond just that little thing that you put at the top of your stationery or on your business card, which is why we're so pleased.
We're very pleased to have Moses Foster with us because we're still learning a lot about brand. We think we've got a lot to learn tonight. We're still trying to figure it out. And Moses is actually an expert. He's going to share that with us.
Right. Now, Moses, as you probably know already, is the president and CEO of West Cary Group, which is a marketing and advertising firm in the Richmond area. And I get to tell you just a little bit about Moses. So, first of all, he went to Virginia Tech. Yay, that's a good school. Earned his BA in communications. He started out as a copywriter working for companies like SunTrust Banks and Hilton Hotels and the American Red Cross and so on. And then moved on to doing work for Capital One, held several positions with Capital One, as did most people in the Richmond area, right? Okay, and then as we move on a little bit more, he started West Cary Group, about 6 years ago? 6 years ago. And his clients are quite impressive. He's got Midwest Vaco and Cigna Insurance and AstraZeneca, Genworth Financial and Capital One in Henrico County and the Richmond Airport and so on, and has done some really creative and inspiring work. So we're very pleased to have Moses here with us today. Thank you, Moses.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to be here, and please bear with me. I've had a cough for a little while, and I don't have a microphone, so every once in a while, if I go get a drink and I have to take a little bit of pause, bear with me. But excited to be here because I'm talking about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, brand. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today don't take it as the gospel, right? Take it as a point of view, because there's more than one way to do brand. There's more than one way to manage brand. There's more than one way to create a brand. There's more than one way to nurture a brand. But what we want to create, we were talking about this earlier, what I like to create is frameworks. I like for people to have the guidelines through which they can think about things, right? So that's what I want to put forth today. So the name of my presentation is Brand Considerations, not brand edicts, not brand mandatories, but brand considerations, okay? A lot of the examples that I give today as I talk to you are going to be examples that are West Cary Group based. West Cary Group is my firm. It's not because I'm a megalomaniac, it's because those examples are actually ones that I know to be accurate and true. But I do think that we can have a conversation as opposed to me just standing up here and giving a dissertation. So there will be times where I ask for feedback and communicate with you directly in the audience. So please don't feel like this is a one-way communication. Let's actually engage. Okay, does that make sense? Everybody up for that?
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So the first thing that I want to talk about is brand and it not being synonymous with advertising. But before we actually get into that, I like definitions, right? So everybody's on the same page with regard to what we're talking about and how we define things. Here's how I define brand, and this is how we define brand when we go and talk about brand to our clients. Brand is a promise that, when kept, creates preference and sometimes forgiveness. Now, I always like to repeat that for retention because I think it's really, really important. Brand is a promise that, when kept, creates preference and sometimes forgiveness. Now, is that the only definition of brand? No. If you asked 100 CMOs what their definition of brand was, would 99 give you a different answer? Yes, absolutely. But I do think there's some important things in that definition. Brand being a promise, right? That's the first thing, promise. That's a commitment. And I think that's what you have when you have brand, if managed properly. You have a commitment that creates preference. What is the benefit of actually investing in brand, right? If you have a product or service that you market or sell, and you make an investment in brand, because brand is hard work. It's an investment. It's not easy to do. It's not something that you can do just off the side of your desk. I guess you can. It's not something that you can probably do well off the side of your desk. You got to be thinking about brand each and every day. If you make that kind of investment, what's the yield? Well, I think one of the yields is it creates preference. So in the sea of services and products that are very similar to your product, your brand can be that differentiator, which determines whether someone will patronize you, will buy your product or service, right? And you know what? In a lot of cases, especially when you have industries or products that are a little bit more commoditized, brand can be the differentiator that takes the conversation away from price, which is not where you want to go, I think. I'm going to be the lowest cost provider. You can play that game for a while, but eventually there's a point beyond which you can't go unless you want to pay people to use your product or service, right? But brand can take you to a different space, and I think that's very important. It creates preference and sometimes forgiveness. I'm going to come back to that later. We'll talk about the forgiveness piece, right? Not a card that you want to play often, but there probably are times where you're going to need to play it. And I think if you've invested properly in your brand, then you'll understand the dynamics of that, okay? So, a little bit about brand and it not being synonymous with advertising, okay? So, I'm a student of advertising. I've grown up in this industry. Really enjoy not only how people market and advertise today, but how they've done it historically. And one of the things that's really become clear recently is kind of the massive sea change that's going on with regard to marketing and advertising. And advertising, even in itself, is almost an antiquated phrase, because when you think about ads, you think about the old days, right? Advertising was a very one-way communication, if you can even call it communications. It was a very one-way dialogue, right? So in the old days, there weren't the tons of channels that you have now. There weren't mobile devices, and there weren't social mechanisms, and there weren't, the internet wasn't really around and things like that. It was a lot simpler. It was a lot easier. But advertising and building brand was different, right? So back in the day, if you go back 50 years or so, what were the big channels 50 years ago in terms of giving people a message? And I know we're talking mostly to small businesses, but think about advertising in general. If you wanted to advertise your product or service and build a brand, how would you do it 50 years ago? Print. I heard print, radio, television. What else? Yellow pages. What else? Billboard. Direct mail. What else? What about Google? What search engine marketing? What about Facebook? What about Friendster? Right. It was a lot simpler. I mean, the channels were very easily defined. And the other interesting dynamic about advertising and brand building back then was that it was very one way, right? There weren't the feedback mechanisms that you have now. So if you had a product or service that you wanted to tell people made you faster, smarter, slimmer, better, whatever, you could blast that message out in those channels that we talked about. If you did that and people didn't believe it, what would they do? They might tell a friend or a family member, whatever, I'm not so sure that this product actually does make me smarter. They say it does, but I'm not sure it does. But that was about the end of it, right? You know, and if you didn't live up to that promise, okay, you're talking to a family member or you're talking to a friend, but it's not that big a deal, unless you did something egregious. If you did something egregious, word's going to get out. But if you didn't do anything egregious, really your method of brand building in a lot of cases was simply putting out that message, and there was precious little that your target audience could actually do to refute it, okay, and make an impact. Now, if you fast forward to today, and you start to think about the sea change that I was talking about in terms of how you message, how you build brands, I think it's remarkably different. And I know there's a lot of activity that goes on right now, a lot of conversation that goes on right now when people talk about branding, they talk about advertising, and they talk about marketing. But I can tell you, it is a very, very different world. And all of the activity and all of the conversation that's going on in this space is justified. Because now what you have are feedback mechanisms. And you know what? They matter. They matter. If your brand cannot live up to its promise right now, today, in your advertisement, like that, word's going to be on the street. Someone's going to get on Facebook, someone's going to get on Twitter, someone's going to get on social, someone's going to do something that communicates not just to an individual or two, but a network of people that then talks to another network. And this thing propagates exponentially. And so living up to your brand promise every single hour of every single day becomes absolutely important. So you can't think of it as just advertising, because it's not. It's everything that you do. It's every touch point. It's how you engage. It's me standing up in this conversation and having it with you today, and then going home tonight and looking at Twitter. I bet someone's going to tweet something about this conversation we had today, or on Facebook, or going to the Chamber of Commerce's site, or Doug and Polly's site, or Twitter account, or whatever. There's going to be activity there, and if I didn't live up, if I'm a fraud and you expose me as a charlatan, it's going to be in the social sphere in some way, shape, or form. So, I think the whole dynamic is different, and I think there's some very interesting qualities to social and how you should think about them, and the digital landscape at large, and how you should think about them with regard to brand, right? So the first thing that I think is really, really intriguing is that social gives you the opportunity to eavesdrop on conversations, and I love it. Because if you're a marketer, you're an advertiser, or you're a brand builder, you want feedback on how your brand's doing. You might ask people, or you might do some market research or whatever. But as a marketer, what I want to get to is unbiased opinion, or as close to it as possible. And in social channels where there is no downside to people expressing their true feelings, you can start to eavesdrop on those conversations and really start to get at sentiment, how people feel about your brand, right? You can listen. There are tools. I mean, you can do them yourself. You can follow things on Twitter, or you can listen to conversations and do selects and searches and that kind of thing, and narrow in on your brand or your category or your industry and hear the conversations. And I think that's really, really powerful. Or you can narrow in specifically on your brand. We do it all the time. Not only do we monitor what our competitors are doing, but we monitor what the conversation is about West Cary Group and what we do. Very, very important. If you are not doing things right, if there's something wrong in your value proposition, if there's something wrong in your service offering, social is a great, immediate, fast way to get feedback. Love that about the new world. I think there's an opportunity with some of these channels as well to hyper-target. to hyper target on specific people that might be most likely to buy your product or service. And those are the places that you really want to build your brand, right? So when we talk about these channels like print and television, radio, back in the old days, these were mass channels, right? You communicated to a lot of people. And the benefit of that is you brought in volume and you communicated, and every impression that you deliver was cheaper because you're buying in volume. It's like going to Costco. But now I think you can do more targeted communication to specific people most likely to want to know more about your brand or most likely to buy your product or service and their networks. So it's a highly qualified universe that you can now influence, which is really, really exciting. That's the second point. And the third point is the intimacy of the conversations that I think you can have with regard to your brand in this environment. So you don't just have to listen. You don't just have to watch what other people are doing. You can actually participate in the conversations, which is really, really interesting as well. And you can say, hey, I'm participating in this conversation and someone said X about my brand. I don't agree with it. They didn't have all the facts. Here's the facts. What they were talking about was something completely different. We did not do that. What we did was this, and you can lay it out. Doesn't mean everybody will believe you, but just like back in the day when it was a one-way communication and you didn't have the opportunity to influence, in this particular space you have the opportunity to influence positively, or you can refute the negativity if your brand is responsible. So there's this two-way communication, this feedback loop, these feedback mechanisms, I think, are dramatically different than the context and the world that we used to play in with regard to building a brand. The final thing I think that's interesting about that is, and here's the beautiful thing, especially because I am a small business owner, and I know that everything costs money, and if you're trying to bootstrap it, you look at every dollar. A lot of these channels that I'm talking about now, really powerful channels with more resonance even than the paid advertising, are free. Doesn't mean it's easy to do. Doesn't mean it doesn't take time. Doesn't mean you shouldn't put a lot of investment and energy in crafting the right content. But you don't have to pay for the media. In fact, if you don't pay for the media, it's probably more powerful for the people you're trying to influence. They know that this is an authentic conversation as opposed to a paid placement. And it doesn't mean that traditional advertising doesn't have its place. It absolutely does, and it's a powerful way to build brands. People still do it all the time. But there's another contributor to the brand building story now. And I think those conversations, those intimate conversations, are very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So I just had a question. I'm always intrigued by ways that people build brands in an unpaid fashion, because we know how to do it in a paid fashion. But in the unpaid fashion, what do you do to build your brand? How many small business owners are there here? Raise your hand. Okay, a lot. Okay, I'll start. One of the ways that we, as West Cary Group, and me, as a representative of West Cary Group, build our brands is by going out and expressing our point of view, right? We think we have unique points of view. We think we have approaches that work in the marketplace, and we like to go out and tell people how we do things because we get excited about it. And every time people see us speak, there's always an opportunity that comes out of that. So it's kind of a win-win. That's one of the ways that we do it, and it's not paid. I didn't pay to get involved in this conversation, but it's a great opportunity for us to represent our brand and how we think. I'm interested to hear how others do that. Yes?
So what we do is we provide concierge style service to our customers. So we can tell who you are, we deliver the product to you, we don't want you to go to our routes, we do parking. So, every time somebody donates something, we provide a service. That's our kind of
Love it. Love it. And you're reinforcing your brand equity there as well. I love that. Yes?
I think you have to be very clear about your points of differentiation and then be very targeted in terms of who you're speaking to, because you have limited dollars, as you said, and limited time.
Absolutely. I think it's a great point. You have to be very, very, very clear about what you're saying and how it differentiates from everything else, now more than ever, because people are assaulted more than ever by messages. I mean, text and social and Twitter and Facebook and ads and television and online. I mean, there's so much. If what you're saying isn't relevant, relevancy is a big, big, big deal these days. If what you're saying isn't relevant, you're lost. Other thoughts on how you differentiate in an unpaid fashion your brand. Yes.
Whatever organizations you decide to volunteer your time with, do I go and, if I volunteer with the chamber, am I going to be on life or am I going to be on a business council? Or, if I decide to go, maybe I don't do the chamber, I'm with the Rotary. So different organizations that you go on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. You have your own, what you say, brownie business? Don't be afraid to market your brand here, man. That's what I love about the chamber. Take the opportunity. So I probably owe you $20 because that is the perfect segue to my second point. Perfect segue. So I'm going to move to my second point. I absolutely agree with you. Second point, know your value proposition, right? So, I think you made this point as well. I do a lot of presentations to small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses, conferences, the whole nine. And I am floored. I am completely shocked, as a matter of fact, at how many companies, small, medium, large, it doesn't matter, can't articulate the value proposition. They can't do it. To your point about elevator speech, they can't succinctly say what differentiates their product or service from the competitive set at all. I mean, I do. When there's a presentation that I do that I have done. And there's a little piece of the presentation where we actually do kind of a workshop where we sit down and we ask companies to, write down your value proposition. And I give them a framework, All they have to do is fill in the blanks. I mean, what comes in, people are getting extra pages. It's like a 5-page form, you're like, really? Really? It takes 5 pages to communicate your value proposition? So I think it's really, really important that you differentiate your value proposition. And it sounds like, surface level, of course, you have to be differentiated. But I will tell you, as a proprietor of services that, of professional services that actually help companies work on this stuff, I can tell you a lot of people don't do it. But it goes deeper than just being able to differentiate and just being able to articulate. I think if you don't understand your value proposition, you really you're struggling not just with your brand and your marketing and your advertising, but really your business strategy, right? How do you know what to say no to if you don't even know what you do? How do you know what opportunities to go after if you're not clear on what differentiates you, right? Because you're going to make an investment. This is about investments. It's economics. You've got finite resources, and you need to figure out how to take these sparse resources and invest them in the things that are going to give you the highest return, right? How do you know that if you don't even know what you're doing or what differentiates you from the competition? You got to know your value proposition. If you can't articulate who you are and what you do in a couple minutes or less, I think you need to go back to the drawing board and really figure it out. It's a great process. It's a great process. And it doesn't, I joke about, we have this little workshop and I give them, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and they write it out and they communicate it to. But it's a long process because really getting down to your value proposition is really about business strategy. So you have to think through, your business. What business are you in? What business are you? What business are you in? And then what business are you really in? I've had moments where I thought, okay, marketing and advertising is the business I'm in, but I'm really in the real estate business because I've gone through a historical renovation of a building for the past year. A lot of my time was spent, going through that renovation. It felt like I was a realtor, or a developer. What business should you be in? How does that stack up to the competition? You've got to know all of those things. And if your value proposition is broken, I would argue that your business strategy might be broken. So here's how we think about it. Someone was asking me about this earlier with regard to West Cary Group. You guys do this, and you do that, and you do that, and you do that, and you do that. And I told them, and this was just, probably 10 minutes ago, I said, yeah, we do all those things, but we can't very well tell organizations that you have to put a fine point in your value proposition and then in turn say we're all things to all people. That would be like telling people mobile is very important and designing our entire site in Flash, right? Doesn't work, right? So when we think about, what we do in terms of our service offerings, we do a ton of things. We do everything from mobile application development to social media monitoring, to website design and development, to print ads, to human resources videos, to television campaigns. And we do those, and that's only the beginning of the list, and we do them across the board to a variety of clients in a variety of categories, right? But when we think about what differentiates us, how do we talk to our clients? What separates us from the competition? Because you've got a host of advertising agencies that can play in this game, right? You've got a host of competitors. And for a lot of people, advertising is a little bit of a black hole. So you really don't know what one agency brings you, versus the next, because it's advertising, right? They go back and they do their thing. There's some creative stuff going on, and they bring you back pretty pictures, right? That's the process. That's what people think, right? Well, here's what we tell our clients. We say, how we differentiate our products and services, we will beat your current, and I'm going to use a industry jargon term for a moment, and then I'll translate it. We will beat your control. So if you think about an experiment, right? Go back to high school or college or whatever, and you think about an experiment, there was always a control, right? There was always something that you actually measured outcomes or results against. Our value proposition is, regardless of what business you're in, regardless of what channel you're employing, regardless of what your product or service is, we can analyze your business, we can look at your marketing, and we can give you a greater yield. We can beat your current control. So your best performing marketing campaign, or your best performing direct mail package, or your best performing website, we think we can beat it because we think we can outthink whoever did your website before, your marketing piece. Now there's a lot embedded into we will beat your control. We will give you, translated, that's basically saying we will give you greater return on your investment. So we will give you a greater return on your marketing investment. What goes into that? Measurement, analytics, situational assessments, deconstructing and reconstructing, painting a vision for my team that is, we've got to be smarter than the competition, making sure that we don't drop the ball in client service as we're trying to be engineers and scientists as well as artists and writers. All of those things are embedded in that, but we had to put a fine point on it. And at the end of the day, we thought that this was a clear value proposition for our business. I'll tell you why. If we tell people we can give you a greater yield on your marketing investment, we think that that is a palatable, even intriguing and compelling value proposition in good times and bad. When the market is great, people want more return on their investment. When the market is poor, people want more return on their investment, right? So we spend a lot of time not only executing campaigns, but measuring the value and reporting back out to our clients. Here's what you used to get, here's what you get now. That's the benefit of working with West Cary Group, right? And that's a message that resonates, we believe, in good times and bad. Second is job security, right? So if you can prove your performance, if you can actually show people, here's what you're getting, you're more likely to keep your job, right? Because at every step of the game, at every stage, there's going to be someone trying to knock us off, right? And move in and supplant us and take the business. And I don't blame them, because we do the same thing in a good-spirited way, but we're competitive. We want to win. And we think that we can beat your control, so we're going to look at what you're doing and we're going to try and win, right? And so if we can continue to do that and we can prove that out, that's a compelling proposition to people. So that's somewhat differentiated. A third piece, which is interesting, is that we have looked at the competitive set, and then we've looked at, one of the things we're also minority owned. So there are some opportunities that actually come to play for us because we're a minority owned business. As we've looked at the competitive set, some of those competitors being minority owned companies, no one has claimed that space. So there's a market opportunity there as well. And so I think defining your value proposition is really, really important, because you also define, in part, the market opportunity and exploit it. So I wanted to show you guys a little video, which I think is interesting. This is a company attempting to explain their value proposition.
It's here that Jeff and Craig launched Razorfish, which is now worth $4 billion. One of the most successful companies on the web. Successful at what? Good question.
We've asked our clients to recontextualize their business. We've recontextualized what it is to be a services business.
You know, there are people out there, such as myself, who have trouble with the word recontextualize. Tell me what you do in English.
We provide services to companies to help them win.
So do trucking firms.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
What is it you do?
And our talent is to do a certain thing, whereas the trucking
But what is it you do?
we radically transform businesses to invent and reinvent them.
That's still very vague.
Business strategy.
Oh, that is. This isn't a small company, and you know, so you might argue, yeah, they were valued at $4 billion. West Cary Group is not, so maybe they know more than I'm giving them credit for. But wow, how embarrassing! It could not. And from what I understand, I haven't done detailed research. From what I understand, these guys were removed from senior leadership shortly thereafter. Razorfish, and I think Razorfish was actually assumed by another organization or whatever. I don't know the history, but you know, I think they still, in some way, shape, or form, exist. But I do think this happened in the time where .coms were booming, right? And people were putting together companies, and as long as they had a .com after it, it didn't matter. You know, or you were in some way involved in the .com business, it didn't matter. You could get funding, and you could build a business. And I think they forgot the basics, which is, what do you do? What do you do? Recontextualize what it means. I mean, what? What is that? What is that? Okay. Next point. A brand, in our opinion, is being created whether you manage it or not. Okay? So if you think about that a moment, you know, you have a choice as a business owner or a part of a business to actively manage your brand or to let it manage itself. But please be clear. There's a brand that's created, and it's out there, and it's people are talking about it, and you know, people have a sense of what that brand is all about. If you don't manage it and you roll the dice, you better hope things go well, right? If you do actively manage it, I think you have much more opportunity to make sure that company lives up to your expectations. You know what was interesting is, this is a stretch in terms of an analogy, but I thought about it the other day because I was so incredibly moved by this guy's story. So one of the guys that we're using, one of the contractors that we're using to work on our building, the renovation I was talking about, he's a roofer. And, you know, 4 months ago, he was out of the building. There was a little bit of a leak or whatever. And, you know, he had an eye patch on. I said, "Hey, what happened to your eye?" He's like, "Oh, I was cutting a tree and a piece got in my eye." You know? And a week later I saw him, and, you know, he didn't look any better. I was like, "How's your eye doing?" He's like, "Yeah, it's not getting, it's still, you know, kind of messed up, you know?" And it didn't look like it was getting any better. And so he came out a couple more times, and then we were done with the project. He came out late last week, and I saw him. I was like, "Oh, it looks like your eye cleared up." He's like, "Yeah, funny you mentioned that, because actually after I finished that project, it didn't get any better. It actually got worse, a lot worse. And then my eye started, you know, stuff started draining out of my eye, and then it moved to my other eye, and I went completely blind." He's like, he went completely blind, lost all sight of it in his eyes, lost all sight. He did not manage it. He let it go. It's okay. It's not going to be bad. Went completely blind. He had a fungus in his eye because one of the trees he was chopping down was dead. A piece got in his eye. Fungus spread from one eye to the other. He didn't manage it, and he went completely blind until one doctor was looking at his report. He's like, "Oh, I know what the problem is. With the tree dead? Yeah, okay, here, you need to take this." And it cleared up. But I thought about that. I was like, you know, I mean, I know this stretches an analogy, but it was so impactful. But a brand, you know, building a brand is not that dissimilar. If you don't manage it properly and you just let it go and manage itself, before long, and these days it doesn't take very long, you've got a completely different situation, and it may get out of control. And if you don't contain it while you still can, it might be unrecoverable, the loss. So I really, really encourage you to think about actively managing your brand. Now, remember what I said earlier. Brand is a promise that, when kept, creates preference and sometimes forgiveness. This is another place where I think it's this is another reason why I think it's very, very important to actively manage your brand. When you develop a brand, you develop so there's two things that happen. One is awareness for your brand. So people know your brand is out there, right? So Whitestone, people know that brand is out there. West Cary Group, that's a brand that's out there. They're aware. They might not know what we do, but they're aware. And then there's a second piece of it, and that is what we call equities, right? So those things of value that are associated with your brand. So I think the first step is people have to be aware that you're there. The second step is your brand's got to stand for something, right? And so the equity piece is the second piece. So as you actively manage your brand, I think part of it is actively managing those equities. What your company stands for, where the points of value are, what you are unwilling to negotiate upon, what you absolutely will not do or will do. Those are your equities, you know? And so it's very, very important that you think about those equities and you think about, again, the touch points, all the opportunities for people to touch your brand, be they advertising, social, mobile, Twitter, whatever, and you reinforce those equities. Very, very important. And I'll give you an example of how West Cary Group thinks about this. So some of our brand equities that we actively manage, right? It doesn't mean that everybody, when you say West Cary Group, they're going to come up with these 5 things. Doesn't mean that. But some of the things that we actively manage. Service orientation. I think it's very, very important for a professional services organization to understand what business they are in, and it's a service business. If you are not taking care of your clients, doesn't mean the client is always right. It means the client is always the client, right? If you're not taking care of your clients, you need to get out of the business. There's no place for it. Service orientation, very, very important to us. Trustworthy and reliable. I cannot tell you how often companies that are in the business of serving other companies show up late, poorly prepared, don't have the information or whatever they were supposed to deliver on time, make excuses, blah, 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 blah. There's 1,000 excuses that you can make. Doesn't mean that mistakes won't happen, but being trustworthy and reliable in terms of our delivery of what we've committed to, what we've promised, very, very important to us. The ability to outsmart the competition, very, very important to us. We got to outthink the competition. Doesn't mean everybody in our organization or even anybody in our organization is rocket scientists, but we got to have a framework. We got to have an approach. We got to have a roadmap for how we attack problems and how we solve problems, because we got to get to right most of the time, if not all the time. There are a lot of smart people in the world. We got to figure out how we outthink them, even if that means bringing in the right resources to outthink them. Doesn't mean we have to have all of that resident knowledge internally. We just have to know we don't know X, Y, and Z. In order to solve this problem, we're gonna have to bring that in. I've got a guy on my board, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. I've got a guy on my board named ChamberU, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. Very quantitative. He has a physics degree from Harvard. He has an MBA from UVA. He's got a law degree. He's overeducated. Really, really smart guy. But when I was starting West Cary Group, I knew that analytical rigor was going to be very, very important to our long-term success. As I told you, we measure things. That's our value proposition, right? I knew that I wanted quantitative ability that far exceeded my own. And ChamberU is someone that I knew. I'd worked with at Capital One. He'd gone on to do other things, but we always maintained a close friendship. And when I got ChamberU on my board and I said that, hey, I'm not paying you a lot, but by the way, I got some demands, right? So one of the things that I want you to do is not just be a director once a year, but I want you to be an executive director. I want you to be an active director in our business. And I'm not going to make the call every month. I'm not going to make the call every day, but there are going to be times where I've got to solve a problem and I'm not sure I'm going to be prepared for it. I want you involved in our thinking, right? And so by bringing ChamberU into our board, I really felt like there was no quantitative problem that we couldn't solve. We could figure our way to it. So that's what I mean by, that's the kind of how we reinforce those efforts, by bringing in the right thinking, the right frameworks, the right people, the right resources to outthink the competition. Forward thinking is another equity that we try and reinforce. So we don't just want to be where the market is, we want to be thinking about where it's going. I know it sounds a little cliche, there's a lot of work that goes into being a forward-thinking organization. One of the things that we actually do to reinforce that equity is bring our clients forward, where the market is going, glimpses of it, reports on where we think the market is headed. How do we get that information? Well, we've attached ourselves to a venture capital firm that is a very, very smart organization, and also another connection to ChamberU, because he actually works for this venture capital firm. that is focused on digital technology and how it drives marketing, right? So all of the new startups with all the latest and greatest whiz-bang things and technologies and functionality that are going on, we know what those are. We know the bleeding edge. We're conscious of the bleeding edge because Caribou and the rest of these guys' day job is understanding the marketplace and what's on the bleeding edge. And they have a very analytical approach as well. So when we communicate with them about what's going on, we can in turn take that information, go back out to our clients and present, here's where the world is going. Now, you may choose to participate here. You may choose to wait till it moves from bleeding edge to leading edge. You may move to tip of mainstream before you actually react, but at least you know where the marketplace is going. Our clients count on us to tell them that, right? And finally, the final one is accessibility, right? So we pride ourselves on being accessible all the way up to me. If you call West Cary Group and you want to speak to Moses, there's no 5 layers of people before you get to me, or there's no. I've had a couple of assistants who you don't need to concern yourself with. Yeah, actually I do. Send the calls to me. I want to know what people think. If they got a problem, I want to know it. If we're not fulfilling, I want to know it. If we're doing a great job, I want to know it. So accessibility is really, really important, and I think that clients appreciate being accessible. Now, is that a scalable model? Will I be able to do that with a 100-person team and 50 million in revenue? I don't know. I know it's important to me. I know it's a core equity, and if I can't do it myself, I think we need to figure out how we keep those mechanisms that have created success and scale them. So maybe there are 3 key people in the organization or 5 key people that everybody can access at any given time. But I can tell you, I want to be close to the action, and that's very, very important to me. So all of those things are things that we try and reinforce. Those are our equities. And one of them that I think is implicit, not explicit, and I always remember this as I get into presentations and get more and more excited about this business that I love, and my volume starts to rise, and I start to get out of breath or whatever. Passion is also very, very important. It's not something we actually actively promote. We don't go to people and say, hey, we're passionate. Well, of course we're passionate. Your expectation should be we're passionate. This is our business. But passion is something we bring to the table. And if you're mailing it in an organization, it doesn't really cut it. You've got to be passionate about what we do. So we try and reinforce those equities everywhere, every step, every touch point. Now, back to that point. Brand is a promise that when kept creates preference and sometimes forgiveness. When things go wrong, when things break down, when things go awry, and they will, this is when you can use that sometimes forgiveness card. We try and do all of these things. It's how we define ourselves each and every day. We work very, very hard. And I can tell you, to a person in an organization, they know what's important to me, and they work very, very hard on these things. But sometimes things go wrong. They will, and they will go wrong with your businesses too. Sometimes you make a mistake. Now, if we nurture and cultivate our brand, and most of the time, 99.99% of the time, we're living up to this expectation, we're living up to our commitment, we're living up to our promise, and things go wrong, and we sit down with our customer and we say, guys, first, mea culpa. It went wrong, it's our fault, right? I am a stickler for accountability. If we screw up, I'm going to admit we screwed up. That's the first thing, because nothing incenses me like someone who's performing for me that has made a mistake and doesn't admit it. It just incenses me. So the first thing, if it's our fault, we're going to sit down and say mea culpa. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk to them about the procedures, the processes, the steps that we are going to take to ensure that it's not going to happen again. And you know what? I can say in most every conversation we've had like that, we've walked away feeling good. Sometimes, much to my surprise, sometimes I think to myself, I cannot believe that our clients are that good. That they recognize what we do, they recognize our effort, and they're willing to say, you know what, you guys nail it most of the time. We're going to put this under the table, and we're going to go back, and we're going to get things going again. I appreciate that. I think we've got the world's greatest clients. I think part of it is the fact that we try so hard to live up to this. They understand that, they respect that, and every once in a while, they're going to give us a break. Everybody makes mistakes. So I'm interested. This is another place where I would love to hear you guys' viewpoints, but I'm very, very interested in places, in equities that you guys actively manage in your businesses as well. What are those things that are so important to you, that you declare them, that you won't negotiate upon them, and you think that define your business? Nothing? Yes, again.
I know with us, it's really important to us that parking is not something that people do. So parking is just, it's on the way to your destination. It shouldn't be your focus of the day. You should be able to get your car taken care of. So for us, we wanted to do something with the employees, with the email service employees, for our businesses, and make those market.
That's great. So equity is you shouldn't have to think about parking. It should be easy. That's great. When you can focus on something like that, it just drives so many different things, It may sound simple on the surface, but to really, kind of live up to that equity, there are a lot of things that have to be in place, What else? Any other equities important? Nobody expecting an interactive session? Yes.
My success is driven by clients.
Interesting. My success driven by client success. Can you expound a little bit? I mean, it seems obvious, but can you expound a little bit on that? I love that. You know what I like about that a lot? So there's accountability embedded in that, right? If you're not successful, I'm not successful, and that's pretty easy in your business. Pretty easy to measure, right? I like the fact that you've got the dynamic correct, right? You're in the services business too. You understand who your boss is. There's a lot that I like about that, and it drives a lot of thinking, drives a lot of activity, creates an approach to the way you go after things. I like that a lot. Any other thoughts?
You mentioned a lot of it, even in our previous businesses, before probably medical and everything else we used to take. I've never sacrificed my ethics or anything else to do. I've never asked my customer to do it. So
Absolutely.
bring that to the table with whoever I do business with.
Did everybody hear that? Integrity. Won't sacrifice his ethics, his values. Important. Yes.
From us, I think focus is key. Action. One company express itself through customer service. The attitude. To then get back to
Exactly. What business are you in, by the way?
I'm just moved here from New York City. I have a business in the city. I'm maybe hotspot.
Oh, cool. Again, don't be ashamed to promote your business. This is the chamber event. I love that about the chamber. It's funny. I think that's great. Again, I know I'm using a lot of building examples, but I could write a book on developing, renovating a property. But I remember, you talk about equities and service and value, and I take note of all these things. But I worked with a lot of contractors, and every one of them had the same speech, And I'm not down on contractors. If any of you are contractors, but everybody has the same. You can count on me. I'm going to be here on time. blah, 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 which is probably why Angie's List was created, right? Because I'm experiencing it right now. But I had the federal marshals come to our site one day and remove a person from the site because he had a warrant out or something like that. I mean, these were people that sit here and tell you all this stuff but are not living up to their efforts. I had the roofer that I was talking about. I was standing with him, and there was a bucket, and it was raining, and water was dropping into the bucket. And he was meanwhile telling me, at this very moment, he was telling me, I never get callbacks. No one ever calls me back. When I do a job, I'm like, consider this your first callback. It's leaky. I don't really care. Exactly. I don't really care about all those times that you've never gotten a callback because right now I got a problem. Yes. What's your business?
It's a junk removal service. Basically, people pay us to haul away anything they want to get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other competitors that are doing essentially the same kind of service. But one of the things that we like to say differentiate besides the price is the customer service aspect. We come on the site, and quite often we're dealing with homeowners that are dealing with the state. And a lot of times they'll say, well, while you're here, can you? And usually before they even finish, I'll say, yeah, sure. Well, here we do. They want us to move a piece of furniture from one room to another, so they can't move it. And I've got my guys, we're not movers, we're hauling junk away. But while we're there, we'll people be, online from the executive to the TV. Or, hey, while you're here, can you also take these branches to the backyard? Yeah, sure, we'll do it all.
Right.
I think part of what the research is your point about not just saying that they're getting customer service, but I'm trying to say to my guys, to the customer, it looks like you're going above and beyond. What I want is the sort of attitude of walking my guidelines. This is just what we do.
Right.
It's not above and beyond. It seems to the customer like it's above and beyond.
It's DNA.
This is just what we do.
Yeah. I think that's great. That's great. That's fantastic. And you know what? You're absolutely right, especially with something like customer service that everybody gives lip service to. You've got to prove customer service. You can't just say it because if it's not DNA, you're going to see it quickly. You know what I mean? You're going to see it very quickly. Yes, sir. Speaking of tooting your own horn, what's your business? I've seen you before, haven't I? Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
We're actually hoping to be known for our quality of our work and our customer service. I hope that's what our brand stands for. That's what our intention is.
I'm so glad to hear that, and maybe we should talk after the meeting. Okay, I'm getting the cue to move on here. So really quickly, and I can go through this pretty quickly. We've been talking a little bit about it, but I think it's really, really important when you think about brand and you think about those touch points. The company that you keep says a lot about you, right? So just as, I was telling you about how I chose my board and why quantitative ability was actually important. There are other people that I've chosen on the board for similar things because they've run successful marketing and advertising firms. They understand the industry. They're great resources when you need additional help and that kind of thing. Associations say a lot about you. My association with the Chamber says that we're invested in the region. And we care about the region. My association with, I'm on the board of Direct Marketing Association, which is a national organization, and it's focused on measurable, accountable marketing, right? What did I say about our value proposition? We're measurable, we're accountable. Very, very important that I associate myself with organizations that do similar things. So I think who you associate yourself with, very, very, very important. Goes without saying. And then my final point is, culture ate your brand strategy for lunch, right? So you can have the best brand strategy in the world. You can lay it out, you can do a lot of research, you can hire high-powered consultants, what have you. If you got the wrong culture, then it's never going to endure because the people aren't bought in that you bring into your organization. You don't have a methodology for teaching people what you hold, near and dear and true, and it just won't endure. So it's very, very important that you think about your culture as well. Long ago in corporate life, I really started to become very fascinated by culture because I thought I worked for Capital One and I worked for smaller firms as well. I'd seen on a small scale how you could do culture pretty well. When I had gotten to corporate America, I'd seen some mishaps in culture. When I got to Capital One, I actually thought, wow, this is an impressive balance of culture and a large organization, a scale organization. But I learned also about personal brand and how to build culture personally as well. So one of the things that I learned was living up to your commitments, doing what you say you're going to do is really, really important. And the people that you work with, you're probably going to see again, right? And so culturally, it was always important for me to be a stand-up guy. I wanted people to say, if I talk to Moses and he says he's going to do this, he's going to do this. And that has gone on to the agency world as well, my company as well. If we say we're going to do something, we're probably going to fulfill upon it. And that's a cultural thing. People know that I will get incensed if we're not living up to that cultural norm. So the final thing, because I'm over time, I just want to play you one other video that I think actually showcases the power of culture.
As it turns out, there's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate in the exact same way, and it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. So let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one?
That's interesting, and a great example of why culture is important. Thank you very much.